What's up everybody, Speo here with the voice of reason. Today we're gonna take a look at a big pad sound. Now usually pads are just in the mid-range and make a track sound a little deeper, but in our case we want a full-on big pad sound with highs and lows and full stereo width and everything. Let me just give you a quick example of what this should sound like. Okay, now usually I always use the Antidote rack extension for my polyphonic stuff in Reason, simply because it's extremely easy with it to have 12 voices on an oscillator detuned against each other and spread across the stereo field. And I also quite like the phaser and reverb on it. But I want these tutorials to be helpful to everybody, also to those who can't use the Antidote rack extension or to those who aren't even on Reason 6.5. So in our case we'll be using the Unison, which has a similar effect. It also creates multiple voices, 16 in our case, detunes them, and this unit also automatically spreads those voices across the stereo field, which is quite useful, so yeah. But now let's get to recreating the sound. First off, we'll create a Thor. In the Thor, we'll use a sawtooth wave at octave 5 for our first oscillator. We'll activate the second one, chuck in another analog oscillator, and we'll bring that one down to octave 3 and also have it as a sawtooth wave. Then we'll activate the third oscillator and chuck in a noise oscillator on that one. Make sure it's white noise. On the filter, we'll bring down the envelope and velocity amount all the way, and we'll bring up the frequency to about 14.5 kHz. You can hold down Shift to be more accurate. Also, I'd suggest setting it to 12, to mode LP12, because I just think this mode suits the sound better that we're making. Also, don't forget to bring up the sustain on the amp envelope all the way, and we can also give it some attack, like 697 milliseconds, and a little bit of release, like 600 milliseconds, or a bit less. Okay, now we'll move on to the unison part. So chuck in a UN16 unison unit. Make sure the voice count is at 16. You can bring up the detune to about 52, and also make sure that the dry wet is all the way to wet, so at a value of a 127. Okay. If you feel that the noise is a bit much for you, you can always bring that one down using the slider that is dedicated to the oscillator 3 level on the mixer section in Thor. So you can adjust the noise volume with that one. I'll just bring it down to minus 3.8 dB for now. Sounds a bit better. Okay, now we can move on to creating an equalizer. On the equalizer, we'll activate the high shelf, we'll bring down the Q all the way, and we'll bring up the gain to about 6.9 dB. We can also bring up the frequency a bit to about 7.2 kHz. This is just to boost the highs a bit. Sorry. Now we can do the same thing with the low shelf, so activate the low shelf, bring down the Q all the way, and we'll bring up the gain to about 10.9 dB. Now we'll use the first parameter at 39 Hz, so all the way down, to get rid of some very low lows, which we can later replace with a sub bass. So the frequency all the way down, the gain all the way down, and then we can adjust the Q to about 6.1. There you go. Now that this is taken care of, we can move on to creating a RV700 advanced reverb. On that one, we'll switch the algorithm to plate, which I think is a great algorithm for this kind of sound. We'll bring up the damp to about 79, and we'll bring down the dry wet to about 42. Sweet. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to apply a phaser to this sound. Now the problem I have is that the phaser that comes with Reason has no dry wet knob to it, so you can't just have a section of the signal be phased, and I don't want the full phasing to go on. That's a little much for me. What you can do, of course, is you can set the phaser up as a send effect to your main mixer, but I like to have everything in one place in case I want to change anything later, so I'll just go ahead and shift click and create a line mixer above the Thor. Then I just take the signal that runs into the main mixer channel and run that one into the channel 1 on the line mixer, and then just take the master out of the mixer again into the main mixer channel. And what I can do now is right click the mixer, create the phaser, and then just dial the phaser in with the auxiliary knob on the channel 1. So I'll just bring that one up to about 48. On the actual phaser, I'll bring down the feedback a bit to about 76. I'll bring up the rate to about 50. Yeah, 50 is good. You can play with these settings, of course, till you have a sound that satisfies your needs. If I just bring up the auxiliary a bit, you can hear the phasing going on. But I like it at about 40 or 50. Okay, now that this is taken care of, we can have a look at the sequencer. Let me just quickly delete this here. If I pull down the MIDI information I've prepared, you can see that this is just chords, basically. There you go. So all I did was draw in a chord, like this one's A minor, I think, yes. And then I just copied the root note over to 1 octave below and 1 octave above. And then in the second part here, I played with the notes up here. So they are still notes that belong to the chord, but I changed it up a bit so we have some kind of melody going, as you can hear. What you could also hear now is that having this kind of big synth, it really drowns out everything else, and that's not that great. So what we can do now is, or what we should do or have to do now is sidechain this signal or this track to the drum track. Now I'm not gonna make a specific video on sidechaining because there are lots of good ones out there. I'm just gonna link to a Dorincourt's sidechain video. The annotation should be about here. And you can have a look at that if you don't know how to sidechain yet. If you do, then just flip the rack around and I'll connect the mix channel to the sidechain combinator that I always have loaded up as my preset in Reason. If I can find it, there it is. Just select a free jack. And in the mixer, let me just quickly pull that over, I'll just activate the compressor. There you go. Now that the signal is sidechained to my drums or to my ghost kick, this whole thing sounds a lot more smooth. Okay, so that's it for the big pad. I hope this tutorial was useful and you go on to making some sick shit with this kind of setup. I really like these big pads and drops because they can just introduce a harmonic and melodic note into some crazy drum and bass stuff you've got going on otherwise. So yeah. So okay, I hope this tutorial was useful. As I said, if it was, drop a like. That would be much appreciated as always. And if you want more tutorials and aren't subscribed yet, I highly recommend subscribing to this channel because there are lots more tutorials to come. I'll see you next time. Have a good one of whatever you're having.